Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Spice Dunes playing as the Wood Elves against the forces of the Empire. And as you can see, we are going very much all in with a bit of a Vanguard build as the Wood Elves here. So for my lord, I did decide to bring a Glady on an Eagle. Of course, the Wood Elves, despite being a pretty ambushy and sneaky faction, don't actually have a Vanguard capable lord, which I definitely think is a little unfortunate. But a Glady on an Eagle is very mobile, and of course does provide that great Prayer of Anathrema as well as the Heir of Kurnus to provide some good sort of damage support. And of course she's not a total pushover in melee either, with 40 melee defense, 65 melee attack, and 70 charge bonus, and she's really actually pretty solid on the Eagle, though of course it's not a top-of-the-line combat sort of unit. Alongside her, I did bring a Branch Wraith, vanguarding here with the rest of my force, and the Branch Wraith is coming in, of course, with the Call of the Wild, or Call of the Woods, sorry. That great little 5 melee attack buff. Also does have the other Trickster's Shard, which is a 22% magic resistance debuff. That means that my Dryads and my Swift Shiver Shards, which I brought 2 of, will actually all be doing, as long as they're attacking a target within this radius, will be doing 22% more damage. That's really, really good. I also did bring Earthblood for the healing, a Penumbral Pendulum just for damage my opponent just kind of clumps up, and the Withering for those armor debuffs, and that should synergize nicely with the Dryads, of course. Also, I did bring the Smoke and Mirrors in case I need a slight boost to mobility. I definitely think it's a pretty decent sort of cast there. My front line is, of course, entirely composed of Dryads, and Dryads are not good against armor, but the vast majority of the Empire front line, especially against when fighting against Wood Elves, is usually not armor-piercing infantry, and usually the lightly armored state troops, and against those, Dryads are actually really, really good, because they got Sphere, they've got 20% physical resist, 60 armor, and besides, honestly, units like, besides, of course, your opponent casting fire spells, like Flaming Sword of Ruin, or having units like the Knights of the Blazing Sun, Dryads are honestly really good against most of the Empire infantry. And of course they are immune to psychology, so they won't just rout. They're definitely very, very solid here. For the rest of my army, you can see a whole bunch of archers. You can see out here I do have a Waystalker. And the Waystalker actually does have one of these little special abilities here. You can see I do have the Eye of Kurnus on him, which provides 10% plus 10% missile damage, boosting my Waywatchers here a whole bunch. And he does have crazy missile damage, good range, and at the Heir of Kurnus again, so he can definitely do a lot of damage. He's standing next to these Waywatchers, providing them with that boosted damage, and they of course will be able to start picking apart my opponent's heavily armored troops as well. In the center here we do have 2 units of Swift Shiver Shards just to melt down enemy squishy infantry a little faster, and then a unit of Wild Riders with shields to get into my opponent's backline, and a single unit of Waywatchers just to provide extra armor piercing support. For my opponent, his front line is a mix of great swords, which are definitely a huge threat to my Dryads, as well as spearmen and swordsmen. Now, once the regiments of Renown for the Wood Elves come in, I think the situation will be much better, because of course we'll have the Waywatchers that can provide a morale debuff, and of course the Regiment of Renown Wild Wood Rangers, who of course have Vanguard as well as Armor Sundering, and they're just a great support choice when you're Vanguarding with Wood Elves. But in this sort of situation, of course, we just still don't have them, so hopefully that'll improve in a bit. But definitely these great swords will give me a run for my money. The Spearmen and the Swordsmen, of course, will not hold up very long, but yeah, those great swords, 95 armor. There's 3 units of them in here, and they'll hit like absolute monsters against the squishy Wood Elves. Interesting enough, my opponent brought a backline of 6 handgunners, and I'm not entirely sure what he was thinking here, but this much handgunners means that he's really going to be able to lay the smackdown on my Dryads, cause some immense damage to them, even potentially shoot down my infantry if he can advance on them, just because he has so much in the way of numbers. He also does a Carl up in the sky, coming in with, I do believe, the Reichland Runefang, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the Reichland Runefang, as well as, of course, Foe-Seeker for that mobility, and he's on a Pegasus, but it doesn't really matter. Deathclaw, of course, doesn't provide him with AP. He has that built in, so he's definitely very solid here, and you can see the Royal Dwarf Griffites behind that to cause fear, terror, and of course, just a great anti-large armor-piercing option. Though they will be very susceptible to shooting. You can see almost immediately those handguns teeing off and melting my poor Dryads here, who are taking immense casualties. So Swift Shiver Shards do go in, and you can see I immediately start shooting at the Great Swords with the Waywatchers, because these guys really need to go down. It's absolutely imperative. And you can see, unfortunately for my opponent, he's definitely clumping up here in a blob, and that's going to mitigate the power of his Great Swords, making him much less effective. And my Swift Shivers are immediately unloading on those handgunners, trying to melt them down a little bit. The Dryads will start dying, of course. They're not invincible, but you can see the Great Swords taking that peppering fire from the Waywatchers. I do try to sneak my Wild Riders around the flank, but will make a bit of a mistake here because I simply don't micro them. My Glady does advance somewhat forward. You can see she's picking away at these Royal Dwarf Griffites. Unfortunately, I do not cast the Prayer of Anathrema on them in a timely manner, and they do get a nasty charge against the Dryads. Fortunately, though, I do get, you can see an Heir of Kurnus there knocking out a Royal Dwarf Griffite, and you can see the Waywatchers now firing at them as they do get netted down. And of course, the Demigryphs, despite having huge armor, are just going to get slaughtered by the Waywatchers and by the Waystalker, and you can see they're definitely taking quite a bit of a beating, though the shots are a little bit sporadic and kind of intermittent, I would say. I do get a rear charge here with the Dryads. You can see the Royal Dwarf Griffites lost several models. They're down to 17 now, and of course despite being very tanky and all that, they definitely not. They're just not indestructible, and they're definitely in a very rough spot here. And they don't have the best of targets. Fortunately, over here you can see Carl did engage on my Wild Riders, who, while they are slaughtering the handgunners now, are in a very, very bad spot and will shortly get routed off. Over here in the pits, the Dryades are getting massacred by state troops just because of the greatsword support. Though you can see the greatswords have taken quite a bit of a beating from the archers. I do get a decent shot here into the swordsman. You can see those volleys coming in from the Wood Elf troops, and just those swift shivers plowing through. You can see they're trying to shield themselves there, and it's just not working out. Fortunately, my opponent, the branch wraith here, is helping slow down these great swords, but they do get into my Steepwood scouts, and I'm gonna have to try to pull them back. They are fairly quick on their feet at 43 speed, thanks to casting from giving me smoke and mirrors, as I did cast a Penetrable Pendulum on these handgunners here. And now my Dryads have busted through that front line. You can see these greatswords are fleeing. I'm going to keep enough Dryads on them just to rout them off. And over here, I did actually commit my Way Watchers into melee. And for those of you who don't know, Way Watchers, while certainly not being kind of a top-of-the-line melee troop, are definitely decent. They have 28 melee attack, 32 melee defense, 32 weapon strength. You can see they're just actually slaughtering these handgunners here in the pits. They're definitely no pushovers. And the Dryads, in the meantime, just chasing down those greatswords. I'm going to chase them off the map. These Dryads over here getting into the cookie jar here against the handgunners. And I just keep peppering away at these Royal Dorfir fights with my Arrows of Kurnus. In the meantime, you can see the greatswords here being kited by the Deepwood Scouts. So we've had 38 speed to the 20 of the greatswords, so really the greatswords can't ever catch them. Over here, the greatswords are being, of course, feared by the branch wraith, and they are trying to gap close here on the swift shivers, who are still firing away at the swords. And unfortunately, I'm going to let the greatswords get too close, and I do believe they will get a charge off. And that is definitely a big mistake on my part. You can see they get that huge leadership bonus on the charge, and that's going to kind of mess me up there. Fortunately for me, though, you can see the spears here getting beaten up by the Dryads, who are just so tanky. Despite not being in an ideal situation here, they'll do okay. In the back line, Dryads still running amok amongst the infantry, and all this infantry is routing off. And of course, the Dryads immune to psychology, so while they're losing models to the enemy griffs, they're just able to keep pressuring this backline. My opponent's troops are just running in fear. And the Dryads, of course, with their fear debuff and all that, they're just going to be so very powerful at staying alive. Fortunately for me, you can see I do actually manage to kind of mop up these spearmen, though the Wild Riders are out shortly thereafter. And the Way Watchers, though, they are advancing. They are up to 78 kills. You can see doing a great job here. My opponent is just not really able to catch my troops. You can see the greatswords being routed off, and really my opponent's army just falling apart at this point. The greatswords sniped to death by the swift shivers. Over here, the Dryads chasing down handguns. Dryads still chasing those greatswords, not quite able to run them down. Really, it's going to come down to a Pyrrhic victory here at the end. So definitely caught unawares by that build for my opponent. It was definitely not a conventional composition against Wood Elves. Generally, you'll see a bunch of cavalry, a little bit of artillery, and a front line usually composed of state troops, sometimes backed by flagellants. It's actually rather rare that you'll see this sort of composition from Empire, but in this situation, it was actually really brutal against my troops. Simply put, Dryads are not that tanky against handguns, especially. And the greatswords are potentially so very, very powerful in that frontline engagement. Fortunately for me, though, my opponent definitely kind of clumped up a little bit. Yeah, I had that spaced out early deployment. I was able to whittle him down with Way Watchers, and just kind of deliver some crushing volleys from the Deepwood Scouts and from all these troops, and kind of swamp the greatswords and drag them into the muck. The Waystalker did an okay job. He was kind of picking away at the Royal Thrift fights for most of the game. Similar thing with the Glady, getting some decent kills. Definitely not an optimal usage of her. Branch Wraith, just huge support in the front line. As far as my opponent's build goes, definitely I wouldn't recommend the handgun mob. You don't need that many. If you're going to bring handguns, and it's obviously has the DLC here because he obviously has the Royal Thrift fights. I definitely actually wouldn't bother with the Royal Thrift fights either. It's much better to simply bring a fairly cheap front line of swordsmen. They're actually pretty adequate. If you don't want to bring swordsmen, flagellants can be okay, though they're very shooting. You just go rather cheap on your front line. Most of the Wood Elf infantry can't efficiently trade with Empire, and then back it up with a handful of either crossbows or preferably silver bullets, or even Sterling's Revenge, just because they have stock, and then a big potentially a mortar for that accurate sort of consistent pinning fire. And then finally, the most important part really is a mob of cavalry. You can bring an Empire captain to support them, maybe 2 Empire captains if you don't want a wizard. I'd definitely bring a caster. Generally, I'd prefer Boris over Karl Franz, but definitely I'd bring a big cavalry contingent. If you can bring a bunch of Knights of the Blazing Sun, this is with 6 units of handguns. That's off the top of my head, 600. That's 1,800, 3,600 points. That is almost 3 units of. That's actually now with their dropped price. That's actually 3 units of Knights of the Blazing Sun that my opponent could have put on the field, and that would have been immensely potent against some of my force, especially. They would have simply been able to ride me down. Not only one Prey Vanathrema. Wild Riders can't contest any Empire cavalry except Empire Knights in a straight-up melee, or any of their heavy cav. And really, I just didn't have the tools to shut down a mob of cavalry. I was definitely kind of gambling on my opponent not bringing a huge cavalry contingent. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent, Major Warhammer. Definitely was a little bit tight in the center, where the Great Swords were definitely potentially a huge match for my Dryads. So definitely a great game. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. Definitely looking forward to experimenting more with Vanguard Elves, especially once we get Norsekin in a few months. And yeah, as usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.